I remember when we first met and you're like, wait a minute, you speak Argentinian Spanish? But it's such a pretty language because it sounds musical, like, ¿de dónde sos? ¿Y cuándo llegaste?
This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. Today's video might be a bit uncomfortable, as we'll be confronting some hard truths. First, I want to extend my respect to my fellow content creators, the Sidley twins and P. Dinah, whose voices add depth to the Meghan Markle saga. I must also acknowledge Angela Levin. While her disdain for Meghan is well known, I appreciate that she always expresses her views with a level of civility and thoughtfulness. And, of course, a nod to Dan Wootton. His journalistic rigor is commendable, and I particularly enjoy his unwavering defense to free speech on various topics. As for the individual currently presenting herself as Samantha Markle, I have no comment. In today's video, I'm going to be exposing how not only this panel, but also the public are being swayed by the ever-shifting narratives of the so-called Markle family. Now, this is just one out of many that I could present to you, but being that it's the most recent, we're going to talk about Meghan's time in Argentina. So in this series with Love Meghan, one of the episodes is with Nachos' wife, Delfina. And in the episode, Meghan goes on to talk about how she learned Spanish and talking about Argentina and the months that she spent down there on an internship. Yes, she does mention that it was an internship now, no longer saying that she worked for the U.S. Embassy. As we all recall what she said on Rachel Ray.
Get a job working in politics?
I used to work for the U.S. Embassy in Buenos Aires, and I don't know, it was another life. Let's say I've had 9 lives. I was only there for a few months interning at the U.S. Embassy, but I loved it.
Listen one more time to what she recently said in the Netflix series.
I was only there for a few months interning at the U.S. Embassy, but I loved it.
For years, Meghan has claimed she worked for the U.S. Embassy in Argentina, yet now the story has been revised to a brief internship lasting only a couple of months. Then, enter Samantha Markle, appearing on Dan Wootton's platform in full view of the public and stated the following. So I'm going to go ahead and put captions on this, so if you're hard of hearing, then at least you can read exactly the words that are coming out of her mouth. So I'm going to go ahead and put captions on this, so if you're hard of hearing, then at least you can read exactly the words that are coming out of her mouth. So there's no misunderstanding here if you speak English.
Sam, I think it is worth picking up on that point, though. I really did feel like your dad was the elephant in the room throughout the series. And there were times when he was almost on the tip of her tongue, but she just couldn't bring herself to mention him.
Yeah, and I have to say, I think what would also be hurtful is, first of all, let me just say quickly, she has this inclination to like align like a used car salesman, in my opinion, with whoever she's with. In other words, you ski, I ski. Oh my God, well, you speak Argentinian, I speak Argentinian Spanish. And that brings me to the point about my dad. When she was in Argentina, she never worked for the embassy. That was a lie. Dad paid for a 5-week study program for her to be in Argentina, and any student who could afford it could go.
When she was in Argentina, she never worked for the embassy. That was a lie. Dad paid for a 5-week study program for her to be in Argentina, and any student who could afford it could go.
The point is, she knows how to speak Spanish, but I doubt that in 5 weeks you're going to become fluent in Argentinian Spanish. So to use that with this woman, and she probably told her falsely that she worked for the embassy and that she spoke Argentinian Spanish, it's also grandiose. It's like, in my opinion, she's a master at being a used car salesman. Whoever she's with, she does that. She's just like them.
This is yet another prime example of the psychological mind games the so-called Markle family has been playing all along, and enough is enough. It really is time to call this out. So either Samantha deliberately ignored the fact that Meghan explicitly told Delphina in this episode that she interned with the U.S. Embassy.
I was only there for a few months interning at the U.S. Embassy, but I loved it.
Choosing instead to use the word quote unquote worked.
The point is, she knows how to speak Spanish, but I doubt that in 5 weeks you're going to become fluent in Argentinian Spanish. So to use that with this woman, and she probably told her falsely that she worked for the embassy and that she spoke Argentinian Spanish, it's also grandiose.
Choosing instead to use the word quote unquote worked in a calculated attempt to maintain plausible deniability. Or she fumbled the narrative ship altogether. It's much like Meghan's infamous Oprah interview, where she spun multiple narratives, most notably painting the entire royal family as racist. This is another instance of calculated manipulation. Remember when Harry, in his interview with Tom Bradby, defensively said, "Did Meghan actually say the word racist?" No, she didn't utter the word outright when discussing Archie's skin color, but the implication was clear. Meghan had already planted the seed elsewhere, carefully constructing a false narrative to sway public perception. And now what we see here is Samantha doing the same. She thinks that she has plausible deniability by stating when she was in Argentina, she never worked for the embassy. Okay, so she never worked at all for the embassy? While technically true, it's a deliberate play on words. The fact remains Meghan was there in connection with the U.S. Embassy. Whether she worked, interned, or provided escort services is actually irrelevant. The fact that the reason why she was down there was tied to the U.S. Embassy in some way. Being that I graduated high school and went on to complete 2 undergraduate degrees as well as an advanced degree called a master's, my comprehension of the English language is above average and can comprehend from this basic conversation Samantha Markle is having with Dan Wootton. As I understand it, Meghan participated in a 5-week study abroad program in Argentina, one that, as it stands now, had no direct affiliation with the U.S. Embassy. This was not an exclusive opportunity, but rather a program accessible to any student who could afford it, according to Samantha Markle.
Dad paid for a 5-week study program for her to be in Argentina, and any student who could afford it could go.
And being that any Tom, Dick, or Harry could go as long as they could afford it, then why need this special recommendation from former Department of State of 40 years, Uncle Mike? I don't mean to belabor this, but it's important that I do this to make sure that there's no misunderstanding in what is being said, because this is always how they manipulate us and make us feel like we're crazy. Here it is.
Sam, I think it is worth picking up on that point, though. I really did feel like your dad was the elephant in the room throughout the series. And there were times when he was almost on the tip of her tongue, but she just couldn't bring herself to mention him.
Yeah, and I have to say, I think what would also be hurtful is, first of all, let me just say quickly, she has this inclination to like align like a used car salesman, in my opinion, with whoever she's with. In other words, you ski, I ski. Oh my God, well, you speak Argentinian, I speak Argentinian Spanish. And that brings me to the point about my dad. When she was in Argentina, she never worked for the embassy. That was a lie. Dad paid for a 5-week study program for her to be in Argentina, and any student who could afford it could go. The point is, she knows how to speak Spanish, but I doubt that in 5 weeks you're going to become fluent in Argentinian Spanish. So to use that with this woman, and she probably told her falsely that she worked for the embassy and that she spoke Argentinian Spanish, it's also grandiose. It's like, in my opinion, she's a master at being a used car salesman. Whoever she's with, she does that. She's just like them.
Totally. Okay, episode 5 is called Surprise and Delight. And this is...
Please share your thoughts in the comments. Did you interpret Samantha's words the same way I did? That Meghan's time in Argentina was merely a 5-week study abroad program with no connection to the U.S. Embassy, open to anyone who could afford it? And unfortunately, the guests on the panel did not have a chance to follow up with any questions pertaining to this subject because then Dan moved on to episode 5 and, the rest is history. Now, I wouldn't have expected the Sidley twins to follow up with a question because they're sort of new to all of this, but P. Dinah, I would have thought would have chimed in and followed up because she has been there from the very beginning. But I guess, when you're friendly with, Samantha, then, you're not going to challenge her on air, especially when it is a blatant lie that she's telling here. There is zero misunderstanding or breakdown in understanding what Samantha is saying here, especially when it has been articulated over years that the whole purpose of having Uncle Mike put in a letter of recommendation was because this was an internship at the U.S. Embassy. Under the fair use guidelines coming from the horse's mouth herself, Samantha Markle, in her book, The Diary of Princess Pushy's Sister, in chapter 29, second paragraph, she writes, I was sitting at my desk writing when the phone rang. I was pleasantly surprised to hear that Meg was calling me during her internship in Argentina. Dad paid a hefty fee for her to participate in the month-long program that Uncle Mike had given her a letter of recommendation for. The first thing I heard her say was, "Oh my God, babe! You're not going to believe this. I'm in the most amazing penthouse that they put me up in. It's like being royalty or something." I was so excited to hear that she was treated well and having a great time, but I was dying of curiosity and wanted to hear more about the handsome men everywhere and whether or not she had a romantic interest. "So what exactly do you do in your position?" I asked. Enthusiastically, she replied, "Well, babe, I get to be a go-between for foreign dignitaries and the media here, like a media liaison." I said, "Wow, I'm proud of you. You get to spend a whole month doing that? I know you're going to do great. Just really be aware of your surroundings and take a lot of pictures," I said. I knew she couldn't take pictures while she was working because that would not be professional, but I was hoping she would squeeze a couple in when she was in the penthouse apartment on her own time. Being there would be relatively easy for her because she was fluent in Spanish as her second language. It was a perfect position for her to be able to interpret between dignitaries as they interacted with the media in Buenos Aires. I also knew that Dad wouldn't have to worry about anyone taking advantage of her because she understood what they were saying. Dad made sure that she had plenty of spending money for whatever she wanted, so she didn't have to work while she was doing the internship. It was an important opportunity, and even though it was only for 1 month, Uncle Mike had worked for the State Department for 40 years and retired, so his recommendation carried a lot of clout. But if Meghan was fluent in Spanish but wasn't fluent in Argentinian Spanish, how could she then be an interpreter here between dignitaries? You know what I mean?
The point is, she knows how to speak Spanish, but I doubt that in 5 weeks you're going to become fluent in Argentinian Spanish.
Finishing up on this paragraph because it is important. Meg had not completed her degree yet, so this experience would go a long way for her resume, even if she didn't finish school. Now, why would Samantha write something like that? Seems kind of odd. Uncle Mike made sure that she was well protected while she was there. All he had to do was put in a couple of phone calls. I heard she was escorted by military security and no doubt was surrounded by very handsome men. So I was assuming that she would meet her Prince Charming there and not want to come back to the United States. God, one could hope that happened. Sadly, though, amidst all her excitement, I never heard her express gratitude to Dad or Uncle Mike for the experience, but I figure maybe she would after she got back to the United States and everything settled down. Does this sound like a program that any study abroad student could do? No, especially being put up in a penthouse and then also being escorted by military security. Give me a break. From Tom Bauer's book Revenge, it says here, during her second year, still uncertain whether she would make it as an actress, Meghan asked her uncle Michael Markle, by then a communications expert for the U.S. government to arrange a 5-week internship as a junior press officer at the American Embassy in Buenos Aires. A couple lines further down, it says, Thomas paid for the study program. Her half-sister, Samantha, would later claim that Meghan was not actually employed in the embassy, but was actually at a school attached to the embassy that arranged work experience. So remember, Samantha said in her book that even though Uncle Mike was retired, having spent 40 years with the State Department, his recommendation carried a lot of clout. But according to Tom Bauer, he was still working as a communications expert for the U.S. government. And then in Lady C's book, Meghan and Harry, The Real Story, she writes, with that in mind, Meghan approached her father's elder brother, Michael, a State Department operative whose specialty was U.S. government communication systems. Within the family, it was accepted that he was CIA. He had been posted to such disparate places as Berlin, Guam, Bucharest, and Ottawa with his wife Toni, who would die in 2012. He was known to be popular and well-connected within the State Department. Meghan wanted him to find her an internship with a U.S. embassy abroad. She explained that she was considering a career in international relations and wanted to test the water with some practical experience of diplomatic life to see if she would like being a diplomat. The difficulty was she had left it so late that getting what she wanted would mean calling in additional favors from friends. Further down it says, I knew the American ambassador in Buenos Aires, the late Michael Markle said. I personally talked to him and got her fixed up with the internship she wanted. As a result of her uncle's string pulling and her father's generosity in funding it, she was offered a 6-week-long internship as a junior press officer in the American Embassy in Argentina's capital city. Boy, oh boy, how many stories do we have of Meghan's time down in Argentina? I'm counting at least 5 now. So according to Lady C, as well as Tom Bauer, this doesn't sound like a program that any student who had the money could go and do. I'm guessing Samantha forgot her time on Tucker Carlson or didn't think anybody was going to remember this interview.
Oh my God, so you didn't get grants and scholarships. You never worked for the embassy. What do you mean you only did a 5-week study program? So our Uncle Mike, who worked for the embassy, as a favor to Dad paid for a 5-week study program. Uncle Mike threw in a letter of recommendation to be kind, even though he'd only met Meghan when she was a baby.
Honestly, I just don't understand how people are not seeing the blatant lies and manipulation by the people that are calling themselves the Markles. Samantha Markle just got done saying that Uncle Mike only met Meghan when she was a baby. Well, then how is this photo possible with Meghan as an adult sitting next to Uncle Mike? Now, many of you have been aware and have seen this photo be analyzed as well as talked about. I've talked about it. The Sidley twins have talked about it. We have all come to the consensus that it had been manipulated and photoshopped. And this is not the only photo that we've identified and shown everyone they have faked and have been digitally altered, as well as many of those childhood videos that have been deep faked and manipulated. Like, when are people like Dan Wootton going to wake up and say that maybe this friend is not really who she says she is? Or could it be that maybe Dan Wootton is aware of what is going on and he's going along with it? I don't know. But when you have this clear and blatant lie coming out at you in front of your public audience and people are fact checking it like myself, how can you not question this? How can you not? Like, when are people like Dan Wootton going to wake up and say that maybe this friend is not really who she says she is? Or could it be that maybe Dan Wootton is aware of what is going on and he's going along with it? I don't know. But when you have this clear and blatant lie coming out at you in front of your public audience and people are fact checking it like myself.
When she was in Argentina, she never worked for the embassy. That was a lie. Dad paid for a 5-week study program for her to be in Argentina, and any student who could afford it could go.
Sounds like to me they're trying to remove any connection to the Department of State, which tells me someone should open a FOIA case with Secretary Marco Rubio's department, the Department of State, to find out the history of Mr. Michael Markle. Now, I've said this before in my Biggest Fraud Alive series that I don't believe Uncle Mike existed. And now seeing Samantha tell this story about Meghan's time in Argentina, it just validates the things that I've been saying all along, that everything about Meghan and this whole saga has all been a psyops. So now with Samantha totally taking Uncle Mike out of it, totally taking the U.S. Embassy out of it, just goes to show that something is going on and where they're trying to distance themselves from any connection to the current government. Because what if we do go looking at a FOIA case and asking Marco Rubio to see if there was a Mike Markle that was in the State Department that gave Meghan this so-called internship? I guarantee they're going to come up with nothing because Meghan was never there. These people are not who they say they are. Is it any coincidence that Thomas Markle Sr., Thomas Jr., as well as Samantha all come out at the same time in the media to hold down the opposition? No. Thomas Markle Sr. is supposed to be out in Southeast Asia somewhere, but he's still following up on the drama with Meghan and doing an exclusive with Caroline Graham again. If you guys forgot who Caroline Graham is, she was the journalist that published the story about Thomas Markle staging these photos and working with Coleman Rayner and pretty much blowing up any chance that Thomas Markle had to go to the wedding. Now, before I go, I want to drive this point home once more in the hopes that common sense begins to prevail. Why would Thomas Markle continue collaborating and feeding stories to the very journalist who was instrumental in publishing the original piece that shattered his relationship with Meghan? Unless, of course, they were all in on it from the very beginning. Now, take a look at this snapshot from the Channel 5 documentary called Thomas Markle, My Story, one that, interestingly, is no longer available for public viewing. Notice something unusual? Why would Thomas Markle, a senior citizen, have 3 laptops stacked on top of each other alongside a desktop computer? Do you personally know any elderly individual who operates that much tech simultaneously? Here's what I can tell you. The bottom laptop in the stack is an IBM Lenovo, coincidentally, the very brand used by the U.S. government. Draw your own conclusions, folks. And on that, love to know what you think. Definitely leave your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I will talk to you later. Bye.
I was such a fraud.